Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm going to be talking with you today a bit about my experiences transitioning from project management to product management. I am indeed currently the account manager at ProdPad, but before that I was a product manager, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And specifically around the reasons that I found it quite difficult to balance strategy and execution. So my background actually as a project manager is in higher education. I worked at the University of Warwick, managing global education projects in various places, normally around teacher training, in places like Ghana, South Africa, Tanzania, and also university projects with Kazakhstan. So I come from a very non-agile world, as anyone who has done any work with universities probably will understand. But through that education work, I became more interested in learning technology and how we can use technology to enhance our learning. So I ended up transitioning into a learning technology company as a project manager. But over time, we were quite a small startup. There were only about 10 of us when I started, and it was a really good opportunity to get more involved in the wider product things that we were working on. So over time, it just made less and less sense that I was called a project manager, and I became a product manager. And I was the first one. There was no one there for me to ask for help or to have paved the way before me as to what best practices for product management looks like. So I had to find that out for myself and pave the way for the organization and how we were going to do product thinking. But now I am the account manager at ProdPad, and this means that I get to speak with product people, product teams every day about their challenges of their product management processes and practices and how a tool like ProdPad can help them with that. And I've noticed that similar to the frustrations that I had as a product manager, there's a lot of common themes around this struggle between strategy and execution. So that's why I wanted to share these with you. And I think, we've seen it here through the conference. There's a wealth of talks and webinars and blog posts all about product being about why. The problems that we're looking to solve for our customers, our users, our stakeholders, and that being the key focus, the key driver of our product teams. But quite often, as product people and product teams, we're still being asked how these things are going to get done. And so this sways our focus quite a lot. And this was the experience that I had. And I know that a lot of you in the room will have had this experience too. But I guess the first thing to do is to define what we mean by strategy and execution. I'm still missing Game of Thrones quite a lot, and I wish George R.R. Martin would hurry up and write his next book so I can enjoy a bit more. It might be a bit dark for you to see, but this is an example of what I mean what we mean when we talk about strategy. So these are the leaders strategizing ahead of a battle, and a strategy is a plan of action to achieve a long-term aim. And it's not necessarily going to be the case that these individuals are going to decide this is exactly what we're going to do the next day for the battle, because there's another side involved. You don't know how they're going to act. So you need to be able to adapt to whatever is thrown at you. So strategizing and a strategy is more about setting your objectives and communicating that, and then empowering people to work through that and communicating it with them. So once you have your strategy, you will hand it over to those that are going to execute on your strategy. And these will be the individuals with the expertise to follow through on those objectives and adapt to whatever happens in order to carry out that strategy and reach those ultimate objectives. So while I do think that there is a crossover between strategy and execution, and sometimes people are responsible for both in whatever form, ultimately they are different skill sets, and so they should be treated as such. But that isn't how life works. That's an ideal version of this. And so I know from my experience, I was moving from a project manager to a product manager role. My project management role wasn't backfilled. I was expected to still manage projects for our customers, helping them to onboard with the tool, but at the same time, try and spend time on the strategy, thinking about what the customer problems were and making sure we were spending enough time on the why. So we often have to wear multiple hats, and this can become difficult and can mean that you lose focus when you're having to juggle all these things at once. And I'm not the only one that experiences this. Marty Kagan, who is the author of Inspired, and he's the founder of Silicon Valley Product Group, through his work coaching with different product teams, he has also experienced that many product managers are actually spending more time than they should be on the project management work, on the how, rather than making sure that we understand and are communicating the why. And Marty Kagan actually suggests that we should spend half a day, every day, focusing on product management work, which when you have a lot of the how questions to answer, seems like quite an impossible task. But as a project manager, I was used to making decisions and justifying the things that we were working on based on this constraint triangle. We were often working on projects that were driven by the customer. So there was obviously a set budget that we could get from them. And they would normally dictate when the deadline was going to be, which meant that once we got the requirements from them, we had to figure out how we were going to try and deliver something that looked like that, which meant that quality often suffers as a result. But I understood from my research as I was moving into product management, and I was spending a lot of time researching, reading blog posts, watching talks, going to training workshops, I understood that my head should no longer be in this project management world. I shouldn't really be focusing so much on balancing that triangle. I should be at this level. I should be at a higher strategic level, trying to understand what our business objectives are, trying to understand our customer needs, and then helping to communicate and liaise with tech to find the best solutions to those problems. But yet, I kept being dragged back into this world because I kept being asked the questions of, well, how much money is it going to, how much money are we going to get? How many resources are we going to have to use? How long do we have? And then trying to get as much scope through as we could based on balancing those two things. So you might be wondering, well, if you knew you were meant to be working at that higher level and you knew you were meant to be looking at the why did you keep coming back to the how? And I think it partly was to do with the sort of company structure as we were making this transition from project management focused delivery to more product thinking. The development team, the engineering team, if they weren't actually writing code, then their time was deemed that was wasted time. If they were spending any time on scoping, discovery, that wasn't valuable. What mattered was the code that was being written. So I felt great pressure in order to keep them busy, actually being able to code. But because I was trying to keep up that pace, that meant that we didn't spend enough time on scoping and led to a lot of tech debt. So it was a vicious cycle of events. The other thing that I think had an effect was the sort of misplaced focus on customer requests and also stakeholder involvement in that decision making, because there was this bit of a black hole around the why that gets filled somehow, and it gets filled by customer requests and stakeholder requests for features, not focusing on the problem. So I learned a lot of lessons along the way, and there's 3 key points that I want to share with you today. The first lesson was understanding what a product manager actually is. So as I was from a project management world, and I was used to managing like £2 million education projects and having to redo that project plan about 5 different times when the contract got delayed initially, it took a long time to move into this more product thinking world. And I think part of that is to do with the fact that my role was, the transition from project to product was more of a natural one. As I think many people that end up becoming product managers, product owners, anyone with that sort of strategic role in product ends up kind of falling into it, especially if you are from like a startup world. So this meant that we had never really clearly defined what a product manager meant for our company. And I think this is still the case today, that when you look at job descriptions for product managers, product owners, these terms get thrown around and there's still not one set job description for what these roles are. So I think we fell a bit foul of that. And because there was no set job description, it meant that I had to kind of define the role as I went along, which was an experience and I enjoyed it. But that's when you end up then tussling with your background in project management and moving to this more product way of thinking. And I think we are naturally biased towards this sort of task-based action. When you're moving from project management to product, and especially if you are someone that's wearing a lot of different hats and trying to balance all these different spinning plates, you kind of think, who else is going to do that work? If you are having got shared responsibilities between two different spheres, whether it be project and product or anything else, you just think, who is going to backfill that? So your time gets split, your focus is spread too thinly, and that makes it quite difficult to then focus on the right things that you're meant to. And similarly, without that sort of formalized expectations of what a product manager is or what product team should be focusing on, then it gets a bit blurry when you're trying to figure that out for yourself. And Tim Herbig sort of describes this balance of two worlds quite well. So the delivery phases are about building the thing right, but discovery is about building the right thing. And you need to have both in order to build successful products. And where we were starting from in this shift from project to product, we really didn't appreciate the discovery phases enough. We weren't iterating, we weren't gathering enough feedback, we weren't testing our assumptions, which meant that we just kept building things for building's sake. And that's pretty much like shooting in the dark to see what sticks. So I think it comes back to, as product teams, we're being questioned about how stuff's going to get done, how long it's going to take, rather than understanding the why we're building the things we're building and making sure we're building the right thing. And this is where I think communities like this are incredibly important. So your Agile community, any meetups you attend around these sort of topics, they hold us accountable to what we truly should be doing as product teams, because often the context of our organizations makes it really hard on a day-to-day basis to break out of that bubble and remember about your users and your customers and keep them at the heart of everything you're doing. As was mentioned at the start, I helped co-found Product Tank in Oxford, and Product Tanks are a global network of meetups that's part of the Mind the Product community. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I think it's just great to have a safe space where we can all share our learnings and share advice and appreciate that we're not on our own. So if you haven't done a lightning talk, I would really encourage you to do that, because it's just a great opportunity to share and understand from each other. So you might be sat there thinking, that's all great. We all know we should be focused on customer problems, but the boss is still asking for a roadmap like 3 years ahead, or like a quarterly release plan. How are we ever going to get to the why? And I do appreciate that problem is real, and I did struggle with it quite a lot. And it's really hard when the expectations on you are different from what you're trying to communicate to your business. But I'd really warn about some of the negative effects about trying to balance this strategy versus execution. And for me personally, trying to balance the project management and product management side, it was from decision fatigue. So I was getting questions from all areas around the direction of a new product and what markets we were going to tackle, and how that met against competitors. But also, we've got 12 developers. How are they going to keep busy for the next 4 weeks? What are you doing with them? And just this constant context switching and constantly being the person responsible, or feeling like you're the person responsible for making decisions, can be really tiring. There's a reason Steve Jobs wore the same clothes every day, and it's to avoid decision fatigue. So I'd really warn against, I know it's hard, but I would warn against just continuing with that because it's too difficult to try and change the conversation. And if you're in a similar position that I was, where you're thinking, you're getting questions left, right, and center. I really cringe about some of the things that I've done in my past because I had to keep the development team busy. Often because we weren't focusing on the discovery side, we didn't really have clear scope for the stuff that we were working on, so tickets would land on developers' backlogs, and they wouldn't really know what they were building, and they didn't really know what it should look like. So quite often they would come to me. And I'm not a designer, but I used to, in like 1 minute, draw something on a post-it note that they should build. And I really hate the fact that I ever did that. No one should ever do that. What I should have done was paused and gone 30 minutes to an hour going to have a chat with a designer. Would that really have been so problematic and lost that pace if we'd have done that? So I just really recommend just pausing and thinking if it is you that has to make that decision, or if there are other experts that you can rely on to help make that better informed decisions. So my next lesson was around human bias. I think we see a lot today around the fact that as humans, we're very short-sighted. We find it very difficult to look so far into the future. And you only have to look at climate change and global warming, which has been staring us in the face for decades. But yet, we're still having to have strikes. Even today, there's, and over the next 2 weeks, there's like global climate strikes to try and raise awareness and try and bring it to everyone's attention that this is urgent. It's the future, but it's the very near future. So we're just very short-sighted. And this is something that I've found in organizations that I've worked at as well. In the learning technology company I worked at, quite often we would be exploring different solutions we might try. And if we weren't really sure on something, we'd just say, that's feature Emma's problem. And at the time, that felt incredibly freeing, and I just thought we can try anything that we want to because we'll just, take it on the nose later, and I'll figure it out later. It's a problem for the future. But I actually think in hindsight, that's incredibly short-sighted, and alarm bells, red flags everywhere, that we just didn't have enough information to make a well-informed decision. And if we'd have spent more time on the discovery phase and feedback and testing our ideas and our hypotheses, then we wouldn't have just had to leave it up to chance and sort of figure out what to do in the future. We would have set out what our objectives were for the future instead. So what I found, and what some of you might find as well, is that this sort of approach to things means that you are quite reactive in the things that you're doing, and it can mean you feel like you're really on the back foot quite a lot of the time, constantly chasing your tail to try and move forward. And it's because we weren't defining what our objectives were, but being flexible on how we got there. We were defining what we were going to do and then just being flexible on the objectives that we were looking to achieve, which just leaves your product at quite large risk because you're just not focusing, again, on what those outcomes are, what the problems are you're looking to solve. You're more just reacting to current customer questions or current requests from sales and not thinking about the future and the bigger problems. And I think we are more predisposed to this sort of task-based work. Sort of culturally, like in the Western world, we reward productivity based on how many things you get done in a day, how many times have you been to the gym this week, how many books have you read in a month. They're more outputs. It's just things that you've done rather than, well, what were you hoping to achieve from reading those books over the month? How were you looking to grow? What were your objectives for reading those books? It's very rare we set an objective for the day. Rather, it's a task list of things to be done. And so I think we often just naturally think towards that sort of task-based work. It's very difficult to shift to that more objective-based, outcome-based thinking. So there were a couple of things that tips that I did, tools that I used to try and remind myself that I should be focusing on strategy. The business certainly weren't averse to me focusing on strategy. I just felt there was a lot of pressure to be trying to balance both the project and product work. And I am a bit obsessed with organization tools. I think every month I try and find a new way to become more productive and efficient, just because that's how everyone rewards themselves. I love using Trello just for my day-to-day work. I've recently become obsessed with the Todoist app, which I'd highly recommend if you haven't yet found something that gets you to do things. I've become much more productive from that. But one of the things that I used for trying to make sure I was focusing on strategy more than execution was the Eisenhower matrix. And I actually wrote this on a Post-it note and stuck it on my monitor so that every time I had a decision to make or a task to do, I would always have to think back to, well, is it urgent and important for me to do right now? Is it about strategy? Then I'd do it right away. If it's not urgent, but it's important, then I would plan how I was going to figure out how to get that work done at some point. If it was urgent but not important, so like that example of a developer doesn't really know what something needs to look like, then yes, that's really urgent, because if that's the thing he's doing next, then he needs that answer. But it's not necessarily as important to my role, because I'm meant to be focused on strategy. So I can delegate that. I can go and talk to a design team or get him to speak to another person in the development team and get them to figure out what the answer is. And then not urgent and not important, which I don't think I ever did, is eliminate. So if it's not urgent, it's not important to you, don't even do it. I still find that hard, but as principles go, it's pretty sound. The other strategy I used was around being able to say no. And this is incredibly difficult if you haven't defined your strategy, and if you don't know why you're doing things, and if you don't know what problems you are currently looking to solve. I appreciate that this is probably one of the more difficult ones, especially if you're in an agency or if you have a small number of customers that do fund a lot of your development work. But it's really important to be able to have that strategy defined so that you can learn to say no, so that you're able to say no when a customer has a specific feature request. If you just do that thing, which I hate that phrase, but if you just build this feature, then we'll renew for another year. Or the salesperson says, if you just build this feature, we'll close this sale. And it's incredibly tempting to then go, okay. But if this doesn't fit into your wider strategy, and it doesn't meet the problems for all of your customer base, then you're leaving your product really vulnerable. If you're not setting out and identifying what the strategy is, what the outcomes should be for your product, someone else is going to do it for you. And they certainly aren't going to care about customer B or customer C, or how sales are going to sell something, or how you meet in the market. So it really is important to have that strategy defined to empower you to say no when you get these types of requests through. And so my final lesson is around outcomes over outputs, which I think works quite nicely with what Mike was talking about before. So as a project manager, I was used to creating roadmaps. It's not a roadmap. Like this. This is basically a release plan that's guessing stuff too far into the future that no one would ever know. But it makes sense from a project management point of view. We've got time, and we've got features. I know what outputs are going to go out. I know who's going to do what when. And that's sort of the questions that were being asked. And when we were working from quite a customer-focused project approach, this is what they wanted to see. But this is more of a release plan, and you should never go too far in the future because, and as I know as a former project manager, this is just creating work for work's sake. You're just going to redo this document a million times every time new feedback comes in, or you get a new customer, or the market shifts, or someone goes on holiday, or someone's sick. So really, this is just creating work for work's sake. So one of the first things that I did when I moved from project manager to a product manager was I understood there are loads of project management tools that can create that previous view. Just loads of them, and I've used tens, depending on what customer wanted what kind of tool. There's just so many that will create that kind of time-based view project plan. But what I understood, because this focus was shifting from how to why, I needed a tool that was going to help me to represent this and communicate this in a way that was easy to understand by everyone in the business. So that's why I actually ended up being a customer of ProdPad. I work there now just because I love the company so much. But ProdPad was the tool that I chose, and there are others out there that would help me to communicate more of this strategic approach and would help me also to think in that way as well. This is a roadmap. This was the type of road mapping approach that we took, which is more theme-based. There's a great talk on Mind the Product by C. Todd Lombardo, who wrote Product Roadmaps Relaunched. So if you're looking at road mapping at the moment and the roadmaps aren't working for you, I would highly recommend watching that talk. It's called Roadmaps Are Dead, Long Live Roadmaps. So what this type of theme-based approach does is it removes the time constraints. So you don't have anything attached to dates. You've got no danger of having to redo work. Instead, you've just got your priorities for now, what you've worked on as a team, as a strategy of things you're currently working on and those priorities. And then you've got things in the next and later column. But in the later column, they'll be quite fuzzy. You know, they've identified priorities. Perhaps you've had a lot of customer feedback around a certain problem that you think is a priority, but you won't really know what sort of solutions you could try yet. Maybe the problem's not totally well defined. So that's where it's quite vague, but as it moves through your prioritization, it will become more clear. So that what you've got is your customer problem. So the theme or initiative should be a headline of a problem or need to be solved. It shouldn't be just about the features. But then underneath that problem that you're looking to prioritize, the problem you're looking to solve, will be the sort of experiments, the opportunities, potential solutions that you could implement in order to solve that problem. But it doesn't stop there, because we're all part of a business and we have money to make and boards to satisfy. So everything needs to come back to your objectives and what your business objectives are as well. So I found that this approach was really effective for us because it helped us to make this switch from that very feature solution-focused view of the world and bringing it up to that product thinking level and making sure that we were focusing on our strategy and being able to communicate that internally as to what our objectives were, but also what problems we were going to solve. So it sort of reframed everyone's perspective. And so this shift was from focusing on outputs as the measure of success to measuring outcomes as the measure of success instead. And I think this shift is actually very difficult for organizations because outputs are very tangible. You've either released 4 times this month or you didn't. You've released a certain number of features or you didn't. Whereas outcomes are more about learning experiences. So by changing that navigation, did you make it easier for customers to find what they were looking for? And there's no sort of right or wrong answer to that. It's more about learning and understanding and iterating on that and having that sort of continuous feedback. So I think that's where there's a lot of resistance to making that switch, because it makes us a bit less measurable on how productive we are. But as I said before, measuring productivity based on outputs is skewed, because just because you release those features doesn't mean anyone's going to use them if you haven't identified what that problem is you're looking to solve. So I think without this sort of strategy and focusing on what the outcomes are going to be, you're really like a boat without a sail. You're just drifting and at everyone's whim of all these requests that are coming in from all over the place, and that will be what defines your product, rather than the strategy and the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. Another powerful thing of this sort of approach to road mapping and strategy and making sure you're communicating it is because when you write it down on paper and you're planning something out, a year, 2 years, and in my education projects, it was quite a few years in advance we'd be planning these things, and it looks like the top one. It looks really straight. These things will happen in sequence, and we'll get there. But actually, in reality, things don't go as planned. And by having this sort of strategic document, which is explaining your why to your teams, this will empower them to adapt as they are navigating towards that final objective, that outcome that we're all working towards. So I think it's really important to have this sort of strategy in place and share it around the wider organization so that everyone is empowered to do their job the best they can, which at the end of the day is what everyone wants to do. So while as a project manager and even in product teams, these sorts of measures are important. How much things are going to cost you, how long you've got, whether it needs to be any good, or whether you can get away with it being a bit rubbish. These things do matter, and you should consider them when you are in your sort of current planning phase. But it certainly shouldn't dictate what you're actually going to build, because you're making decisions based on the wrong things. It's based on what the output's going to be, rather than the effect of the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So I appreciate that was quite a lot of a download of information and all quite personal experiences to me. So there's just 3 things that I want to leave you with today. And the first point is, I think where possible, if you're doing strategy and execution, these roles should actually be different. And I know from my experience, when we were moving through this transition, it got easier when the execution side was shared with the tech lead, and we could work together on figuring out resourcing and time estimates and things like that, because it freed me up to focus on strategy and making sure that we were communicating that back with the team so that they were then empowered to make better informed, well-informed decisions. I know this isn't always possible, and I know if you're in a small organization or maybe where this role description isn't quite clear, then it's not always easy to do this. But then just remember Marty Kagan's rule of spend half of your day on product management, and maybe use some things to make sure that you are coming back to that strategy where you can. If you have not got a strategy, and you're not sure why you're building it, no matter where you fit in the product team, stop and make sure you have a strategy first. Always strategy first. If you don't know why you're building what you're building, whether you are the product manager, product owner, software engineer, whoever you are, if you don't know why it's being built, ask the question. Ask to see the strategy. Everyone should have an understanding of why we're building these things so that you can make better decisions as you're building them, as you're doing your day-to-day work. So I would recommend always strategy first. And then finally, and this isn't always easy depending on where you are in your organization and what the organization hierarchy is, but where possible, well, in fact, no, you just should measure outcomes and not outputs. If you're measuring individuals, and I've seen this a lot in the talks throughout the past few days, if you're measuring individuals based on outputs, they will work to that. You're incentivizing them to just make sure they work through a certain amount of story points or make sure they release a certain number of features. They won't care what those features are. Yes. If you're being measured on these sorts of things, you're just going to comply with those rather than thinking about the outcomes you're looking to achieve. So if you want successful products and you want to reduce your risk in the products you're building, then you should be measuring your people on outcomes. So I would strongly, strongly recommend this. And if you need to go back to your organizations and try and share this change, it is difficult to make that shift, and it kind of resonates with when people were asking questions about empathy earlier. Like having that shift in mindset is difficult, but there's lots of resources that are out there that are trying to explain why measuring outcomes will, give you a better ROI than just measuring your outputs, which is just work for work's sake. So just a couple of questions to think about. We might have time for questions for me, but I wanted to leave you with some questions because I always find it really valuable coming to these sorts of conferences because it gives you time to reflect on what you're doing in your day-to-day. And then sometimes those get forgotten on Monday. So these are the things that I want you to maybe think about based on what I've been talking about. So, where are you at maybe finding that struggle between strategy and execution? And I know that there might be more of you in this room that are more on the technical side, but the question still stands, where is that balance happening? And then how is success being measured on your teams? Is it purely productivity? Is it how much stuff is getting done in a day? Or is it actually the value of the outcomes that are being achieved from that work that they're doing?
Emma, I wonder if just at this point we can just ask anybody if they want to volunteer answering some of those questions, because that will help us kind of maybe engage in some more conversation as we,
Yeah, about the first question, I find difficult, even sometimes in the talk, about the differencing the strategy from the plan, because the plan gives you the output. I'm planning for this, but the strategy should be something more like meta plan or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So the plan is going to be more about how you're going to do something and have more of that outputs focus, but the strategy should be more about the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So if you think about that road mapping situation, it should be, what is the theme or initiative? So what is the headline of a problem or need you're looking to solve? That's what you're prioritizing first. It's not what feature that's not what you're prioritizing. So you're prioritizing the problems, and then you're going to explore all the different solutions that you could try. And if you might be aware of Teresa Torres and her opportunity solution tree. If you aren't, then I definitely recommend taking a look at that, because that really drills down into, there's not one idea. There's loads of ideas, and we're all really biased that our idea is the best one, but that's not always the way. So by having that strategy, you sort of can catch all of those different ideas and make sure they're all validated, rather than just saying, we're going to build this feature because someone asked for it.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I was interested in the second second question, excuse me. How are you measuring success of your product teams and individuals? I think in my case, I work for ASML, Dutch company, semiconductor company. We mostly measure our success based on the customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
Because the customer usually, so if the customer doesn't say anything, it's a good thing, basically. I don't expect compliments, much compliments, but if they don't say anything, it's a good sign.
Yeah, so
in my opinion.
I think it's interesting because now I work in customer success. I'm still trying to work out whether people being quiet is a good thing, or whether I'm just not asking the right questions and not having those sort of touch points that we need. So I definitely think, customer satisfaction definitely does play more to your outcomes, because are you building stuff that satisfies them, that meets their need, as Mike was sort of pointing out in the previous talk. Or, so that is better definitely than, how many features have you released. But I'm still wondering myself about if they're quiet, is that good?
How might we encourage our customers to be more vocal?
I think look at your feedback strategy. So do you actually give your customers and stakeholders, users, the opportunity to give feedback? So at ProdPad, we actually don't funnel people through one approach. If you want to email us, chat to us on intercom, you've booked a demo with us or a roadmap clinic, and you want to just give us some feedback, we'll take that. We'll make sure it's documented we obviously use ProdPad, but we'll make sure it's documented in ProdPad, and that feeds back then into our ideas validation and our discovery process. So I think make sure your customers have that opportunity to give feedback, and make sure you're then also closing that feedback loop. If you just keep asking them for feedback, but you never tell them when you acted on that feedback and did something as a result, I mean, you'll know from being in a business and not getting that feedback loop closed, you just stop giving feedback, because what's the point? No one's going to do anything. So if you make sure that you are communicating back when you have built things based on that feedback, then I think that works then.
All right, we've got some more time. Let's. Who wants to attack the last question? We've done 2 out of 3. I saw a hand. There it is. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. It was a blast from the past for me. I used to be a project manager. So very often nowadays in Agile transitions, we see project managers transforming into Scrum Masters for starts. Do you have any experience on that, or have you had somebody talking about this from your environment?
So I do speak to a lot of customers that take a similar approach. So when they're moving, I mean, often we're having the conversation more around like digital transformation, but often that means that project managers that were once were, now are being expected to do these sort of Scrum Master, product management, product owner roles. And very similar to me, they're sort of a bit told that that's what they've got to do, but you don't necessarily always have that backup of understanding. So I think making sure, I do think communities like this are really powerful. Obviously with Scrum you do have certification, but we sort of touched on points why that might not necessarily always be great. So I think making sure that they're taking part in these sorts of communities and learning. Obviously, I come from an education background, and I think we should be learning all the time and always coming to these sort of experiences. And we don't actually value work that is research and learning in the same way that we value work which is producing a document. And it's a bit of a shame that we don't do that, because we're never going to grow and really give value back to our businesses if we don't do both. So I think encouraging them to not just think about implementing that process internally when they're making that shift, but also learning and understanding what the principles are and what they need to be doing to make that shift is important as well.
Thank you.
Just while the microphone's moving. So I actually have a couple of handy guides for product people. You don't have to be called a product manager, but if you're interested in things like you've got to create a vision statement, or you want to learn more about prioritization games, tips and things like that, I've got a couple down the front, so feel free to come and get some. You can take some back to your team as well if you want. Yeah.
I have a question about the slide about the roadmap.
Oh, yeah.
Because some in a company want to know about the strategy and the delivery of it. I mean, if I was an account manager and I was talking with my product team, I would like to know what to communicate to a client.
Yeah.
The feature when the feature or the release is going to be, the next release will be, and can sell a strategy to my customer.
Yeah.
So, how as an account manager can know when at least the next release will be available with these items and etc.
So this is quite a cultural question, like for the organization, and something that I found really great moving into ProdPad is we never give anyone any dates. So I'm an account manager, I'm often speaking to customers, they say about a new feature that's coming up and they would like that, and I say, oh yeah, we're working on that at the moment, and then they say, great, when's it going to be released? And I just simply explain, I can't give you a date because we don't really know what's going to happen. We work quite an agile way. Priorities might change. We might get some feedback and user testing and decide to take a new approach. It's going to take longer. So, and you know what? Customers take that, and because it's part of the explanation that we always give, and they understand that what we're focusing on is the value that we're going to give to them rather than features that are being released, then they appreciate that. I'm quite lucky because I'm speaking to product managers and product teams, so that I think that's a bit of an easier sell because they all would then go, oh, I wish I could not have to give dates too. So I think that's a bit of an easier sell. But yeah, I think going for that cultural approach and trying to get a better understanding and trying to communicate it in a way that, I could tell you a date, but then I'd have to keep telling you when that date gets changed, and it's just an assumption at this point, and you're just going to get disappointed. Whereas with this sort of approach, as an account manager or a salesperson or, even in the development team, you're still understanding what problems we're currently working on. You still know that we're going to be looking at improving navigation to help customers find data or improve reporting and the data side of things. So you can still communicate that, and you can even share a little bit about what potential solutions those might look like. But then you can change the conversation and ask them for feedback and say, well, what problems are you currently having then? Why do you ask for that feature? And why do you want it to be released, now? What's the problem you're looking to solve? So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling cycle then, because the conversations just become more around problems rather than the outputs and the solutions. So it's easier to say than it is in practice, but just trying to nudge that shift. You'll be surprised how customers are quite receptive to that. Obviously, if you work enterprise clients, that can be more tricky, but often they're receptive.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was great. Actually, I'm kind of covered from the previous question, and following up, I would like, if you have any experience of how much time did that transition take, that cultural transition, because many departments are involved in there.
Yeah. I don't think there's a set time frame. I think it really depends on your company culture and how, are key stakeholders behind that? How much influence do they have? Do they truly understand product thinking? And are they then empowering the teams to act on that? So it's not just a talk. Agile gets bandied around and you're not actually practicing Agile. Similar thing for product thinking. We're becoming product thinking and you're not. So I think it depends on the stakeholders' investment and the empowerment of those teams to act on that, making sure that they're doing those learning experiences to truly understand what that means. Sometimes if everyone's behind it and everything's set in place, they've been to a couple of conferences, they understand what they're meant to do, it can take weeks, especially if it's like a new product. But on the other end, you've got your larger institutions that used to have project management, program management offices, and they're all making that shift to product. It takes a bit longer, especially if your processes are still focused on project. If you are measuring outcomes, not outputs, that's easier. So I think there's a lot of things at play, but taking a look at your organization and how things currently work and what those constraints might be will help you to sort of figure out how long that might take. But I wouldn't necessarily worry about it having to be done quickly, and rather that you are starting to make those right decisions. So a really bad analogy, and I know I'm talking now. So I'm trying to become plastic free, and it's really hard. So like reducing my use of single-use plastic. And I think there's like a lot of judgment on like Instagram and stuff about, oh, you used like a water bottle or whatever. But I think it's about making some small incremental changes, and we're at an Agile conference, so it's making small incremental changes that take effect at the long term rather than just trying to jump to that end goal, which is a theme we've seen in other talks. So, but best of luck if you're going for it. I recommend it.
Emma, thank you very, very much for that inspiring.